He kicked a pregnant black woman onto the sidewalk, her oranges scattered, her body curled in pain. "Get down," he barked, unaware she was the wife of a federal judge. Moments later, a black SUV pulled up, and everything changed. The badge he used to hurt her was about to destroy him. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. The morning sun rolled gently over Clearwater Avenue, painting the sidewalks in soft gold. It was the kind of day that whispered peace, not shouted, just whispered it in the breeze, in the way the magnolia trees swayed above the street signs, in the way the world slowed down for a moment. Arielle Bennett walked calmly, her hand resting on her belly. 7 months pregnant, she carried a simple, reusable tote filled with fresh oranges, spinach, and a jar of blackberry jam she couldn't resist at the market. She moved with the grace of someone used to being watched, but no longer concerned by it. Her braided hair was pinned in a loose updo, wisps escaping along her forehead in the warmth. She wore a soft lavender sundress, sandals that barely held the strain of her swollen feet, and a smile that flickered as she walked past the storefronts. She paused in front of a boutique window, admiring a white linen dress with embroidered sleeves. Her reflection stared back at her, full, glowing, undeniably visible. She looked at herself, not with vanity, but with reverence. This body was doing something holy. This child, growing inside her, was loved more than words could say. She turned, humming a quiet melody under her breath, something her mother used to sing in the kitchen. As she passed the county courthouse, she smiled and lifted her hand in a slow wave. A security guard nodded back, recognizing her. It was subtle, but warm. That courthouse had become a second home ever since Marcus, her husband, her partner, her constant, Benton appointed as a circuit court judge. She'd walk these streets often after visiting his chambers, picking up groceries, exchanging pleasantries with neighbors, sometimes fielding awkward stares from those who didn't know who she was, or worse, thought they did. Today, though, was meant to be quiet, peaceful, just a Saturday morning stroll after the farmer's market. She crossed Main and headed toward Birch, approaching the broad crosswalk that separated the Civic Plaza from the older side of town. The concrete was cracked, the kind that made you slow your step. Arielle glanced down briefly to avoid a pothole, and that's when a low engine hum cut through her focus. A police cruiser crept toward the intersection. Arielle didn't think anything of it. She had the light. Her bag shifted slightly on her shoulder. She stepped forward. Inside the cruiser, Deputy Travis Lane's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. Deputy Travis Lane had been on patrol for 3 hours. Nothing but routine calls, petty complaints, and the kind of silence that made his mind wander. He didn't like downtown. Too many people walking like they owned it. Too many folks from outside thinking they belonged. His eyes narrowed as the figure entered the crosswalk. A black woman, alone, pregnant, carrying a canvas bag. She walked slowly, deliberately, like she had all the time in the world. That irritated him. People like her always acted like they were owed something. He squinted through the windshield. She hadn't looked at him, hadn't flinched, hadn't shown even a hint of nervousness at the sight of a police cruiser creeping toward her. That's what got under his skin the most. The comfort, the unbothered confidence. He tapped the side of his radio and turned onto Birch, parallel to her path. Arielle, meanwhile, continued her walk. She passed a bakery with a chalkboard sign that read, "Fresh Peach Cobbler, 10% off for teachers." She smiled faintly and made a mental note to stop by next time. A mother and child passed by, the little girl holding a balloon in one hand and her mother's hand in the other. Arielle's heart softened. She imagined her own child walking beside her someday, sticky fingers clutching a snack, wide eyes filled with wonder. Behind her, the cruiser crept again. She noticed it now, just barely in the corner of her eye, but she didn't turn around. It wasn't the first time she'd been followed, and it wouldn't be the last. She reminded herself what Marcus always said: "They want you afraid. Don't give them that." Her hand returned to her belly. The baby kicked. A strong, stubborn kick. She whispered, "You feel that? That's you reminding me we're not alone." She kept walking. Deputy Lane's radio crackled with static, then fell silent again. He drummed his fingers on the wheel and pulled ahead, parking at an angle on the curb, just ahead of the next crosswalk. He stepped out slowly, hand on his belt. Arielle saw the movement and instinctively slowed her pace. Their eyes met for the first time. Lane's expression didn't change. No greeting, no curtsy, just a cold, fixed stare. Arielle gave a polite nod, one she'd practiced 100 times in moments like this. The kind that said, "I see you. I'm not a threat. I just want to go home." But the way he was watching her, it wasn't about curiosity. It wasn't even about suspicion. It was about control. She reached the next corner and stepped into the crosswalk, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. One orange peeked out the top, round and bright, against the tan fabric. Lane's boots echoed as he moved closer. He didn't say a word, just watched. And in the air between them, something shifted. The moment that had been peaceful now felt tight, drawn like a rubber band pulled too far. Arielle picked up her pace. She was just half a block from home. She was almost at the corner now. One more turn and she'd be on Oak Street, where the trees leaned low and the sidewalk sloped gently toward the row of townhomes. Her front door was painted a soft teal. She could already picture it. Behind her, the heavy footsteps stopped. But she didn't look back. She focused on the rhythm of her breath, on the feel of her baby shifting inside her. She focused on the bag of oranges in her hand, simple, mundane, grounding. "Ma'am." The voice stopped her cold. It wasn't polite. It wasn't curious. It was a command disguised as a question. She turned slowly. "Yes, officer." Lane stood about 10 feet behind her now, hands still near his belt. His face was blank, but his posture was rigid, tight in his shoulders, elbows flared. "You live around here?" Arielle raised an eyebrow gently, not too defiant, not too submissive. "I do." "You got ID?" "I'm just walking home." That wasn't the question. She inhaled once, controlled and calm, then reached slowly into her dress pocket. No sudden movements, no attitude. She pulled out a slim wallet and extended her license. Lane snatched it faster than necessary, scanned it once. "Bennett," he muttered. A beat passed, then another. "You related to that judge over at the courthouse?" "My husband." Lane's jaw twitched. She saw it, the flicker of something ugly flash in his eyes, something tangled up in resentment and authority and entitlement. Then he handed her license back with a strange smile. "You have a good day now," he said. Arielle gave a nod, turned, and walked the last half block. She didn't look back again, but she felt it. His eyes burning into her back. And in that silence, in that narrow space between her heels hitting the pavement and the sway of the oranges in her bag, she knew. This wasn't over. Something was coming. Something had already begun. The sound of squealing brakes chattered the calm. Arielle turned just in time to see the cruiser whip around the corner and come to a hard stop beside the curb. Officer Travis Lane jumped out before the vehicle even fully settled, his boots crunching against the asphalt, his face tight with suspicion and something darker. He stormed toward her. "You, stop right there." Arielle's body tensed. Her pulse spiked. She was still holding the mesh shopping bag, its base damp from the condensation of the oranges. The scent of citrus lingered, light and clean, mocking how fast everything was unraveling. "I'm just walking home," she said evenly, stepping back slightly, not wanting to provoke. Lane's eyes narrowed. "You got a receipt for that? And the fruit? You stealing from somewhere? Which shop? Ha!" Her lips parted slightly in shock. "No, I just came from the market downtown. The vendor doesn't do paper receipts." "Convenient." He stepped closer and grabbed the bag without warning. "Hey, don't touch." But it was too late. He yanked the bag from her hands with such force the mesh tore open. Oranges spilled out across the concrete, bouncing off the sidewalk, some rolling into the gutter. A green apple thudded by her feet. Arielle instinctively bent forward, one hand on her belly, the other outstretched, as if to gather them, but Lane was already barking again. "Hands where I can see them." She straightened slowly, lifting her palms. Her voice cracked just slightly. "I'm pregnant. Please, don't touch me." Lane's hand hovered near his belt again. His nostrils flared, like the very act of her telling him what to do ignited something primitive in him. "What did you just say?" "I said, I'm pregnant. Please, just let me go home." For a moment there was a chilling stillness, like time paused to inhale. Then, without warning, he kicked her, directly in the abdomen. Arielle gasped. Sharp, high, broken. Her knees buckled, her body folded as she crashed to the pavement. Her palms slapped the concrete first, then her left shoulder, then her hip. Her dress caught on a nail jutting from the curb's edge. The scream that left her was ragged and raw. Passers-by froze. A woman across the street dropped her phone. A teenage boy turned, eyes wide. One hand went to his pocket. Then he pulled out his phone and hit record. The world tilted sidewise. Arielle lay crumpled against the curb, her breath coming in short, stuttering gasps. Her hands instinctively shielded her stomach, her fingertips trembling against the round curve of her unborn child. Pain radiated from her abdomen in sharp, searing waves. Hot, terrifying, disorienting. Her knees scraped and raw, her dress torn at the side, her cheek pressed into the concrete, still warm from the sun. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "Please, please, my baby." But Officer Travis Lane wasn't done. "Don't move. Stay down," he barked, voice cracking through the open air like a whip. His boots stomped around her. She felt the shadow of his presence more than she saw it. Her head was still spinning, her vision blurred with tears. Someone in the crowd across the street gasped audibly. A car rolled to a stop. Horns honked in confused spurts. "Don't resist," Lane shouted, crouching low now, one knee jabbing into her back. He pulled one arm behind her with a rough tug. I'm not resisting," she whispered, barely audible. But her voice was drowned out by the sound of zip-tightening, plastic grinding into her skin. A cold, coarse loop cut into her wrists, forcing them behind her lower back. The angle was unnatural. Her swollen belly made movement nearly impossible. Each shift of her hips sent agony up her spine. Someone shouted from the sidewalk, "Hey, she's pregnant! You can't do that!" Lane snapped back over his shoulder. "Back off unless you want to be next." Phones were up now, half a dozen people filming. A woman in her 50s was crying openly, clutching her shopping bag to her chest. Arielle turned her face toward the crowd, tears mixing with dust on her cheeks. Her hair had come loose from its twist, coiling wildly across her forehead. She blinked through the ache, through the panic, and locked eyes with a man holding a phone steady, recording. "Please," she mouthed. He nodded once, just slightly. Officer Lane, still pinning her in place, pressed his fingers to his radio. He apprehended. "Possible theft in progress. Situation under control." He said it as if she were some nameless criminal, not a human being curled in pain on the ground. He didn't know her name. Didn't care. Didn't ask. Arielle sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. She wasn't thinking about her dignity anymore, or her bruises, or even herself. All she could think of was the soft flutter she hadn't felt since she hit the ground. The rhythmic shifting she usually felt each morning, gone silent. The baby. Her baby. Something inside her began to break open. Not just her body, but her trust in this place, in this country, in the illusion that walking home with oranges didn't make her dangerous. Lane hauled her to her feet by the ziptis, forcing her upright. Her knees wobbled, unable to support her weight. She cried out in pain, drawing more attention. More cameras. More gasps. But not a single officer in sight to stop what was happening. And Lane didn't stop. He shoved her toward his cruiser, oranges still scattered behind her, like evidence of joy turned into wreckage. The door of the cruiser creaked open with a metallic groan. Arielle could barely lift her foot high enough to climb inside. Her hands were bound. Her belly throbbed with a pressure she couldn't describe. Her knees buckled again, but Lane pushed her forward, rough, mechanical, like shoving a doll into a box. She landed hard on the vinyl seat, which was scalding hot from the sun. The pain against her skin made her cry out. He slammed the door shut. Outside, the crowd was swelling. Someone shouted, "She needs a doctor." Another voice joined in. "That was assault. We saw everything." But Officer Lane ignored them all. He stalked around the cruiser, gripping the top of the doorframe, pausing to glare at the bystanders with unfiltered contempt. Sweat poured down his temples, but he didn't seem to notice or care. Inside the vehicle, Arielle pressed her temple against the window, trying to breathe. Her chest rose in short, uneven bursts. Her wrists were burning. Her abdomen was worse. Still no movement, still no flutter. The silence in her womb became the loudest sound in the car. "Please," she whispered again, this time to no one, or maybe to the universe. "Please be okay." In the front seat, Lane adjusted the mirror. He didn't even look at her, just muttered into his radio again. "Transporting to central processing. Suspect is resisting." He lied without pause, without hesitation, as if her pain were nothing more than protocol. Then, as he put the car into gear, a deep voice came from outside. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Lane froze. The door behind him flung open. A tall man in a courthouse security uniform sprinted toward the vehicle. A badge glinted on his chest. It was Judge Marcus Bennett's longtime courthouse guard. Arielle had waved to him not 10 minutes earlier. His eyes were wild with alarm as he pointed directly at Lane. "Do you know who that is in your back seat?" Lane blinked. "I don't care who she is." Tony's voice roared now. "That's Judge Bennett's wife. She's 7 months pregnant." Everything stopped. The sound, the movement, the heat. Lane turned his head slowly toward the back of the cruiser. His face drained of color as his eyes met Arielle's through the tinted glass. Her eyes were swollen, her lips bleeding, her belly clearly round beneath her dress. His fingers trembled on the steering wheel. He'd made a mistake. A massive one. And suddenly, every camera, every phone, every scream from the crowd, it all came into focus for him. This wasn't going away. Not today. Not ever. The black SUV came to a stop so fast that the screech echoed down the street. Its tires left a curling smoke trail against the curb. Doors didn't open gently. They burst wide. The driver jumped out first, panic carved across his face. But it was the man from the passenger side who drew every eye. Judge Marcus Bennett. Still wearing his black robe, still gripping his courthouse-issued cell phone, he stepped into the chaos with fire behind his eyes. His other hand clutched the handle of the SUV door like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He had just come from the bench, mid-call, with a clerk about an evidentiary ruling, when his phone lit up with the impossible. Someone had texted him a video. He almost didn't watch. He'd been fielding community complaints all week about courthouse delays. But then he saw it. A woman on a sidewalk, curled over, oranges spilled around her. A uniformed officer yelling, a belly swollen with life. He saw Arielle on the ground and everything inside him collapsed. The call with the clerk was still running, but Marcus no longer heard it. His phone slid from his hand as he sprinted into the street. Now, standing in front of the police cruiser, all he could do was stare. Arielle? She was barely upright in the back seat, her head turned to the side. Her lips were cracked. There was blood near her mouth, and she was holding her belly, still, not protectively, but like she was listening for something. When she looked up, her eyes met his. Even through the tinted window, he felt the scream stuck in her throat. His voice was hoarse. "Open the door." Lane was already stepping out of the driver's seat. He shut the door behind him with calculated calm. His hand hovered near his belt again. "Back off, sir. You're interfering with—" Marcus didn't move. "That's my wife. That woman you assaulted—" Lane blinked. It took a second for the words to land, and when they did, the arrogance drained out of his face in slow, awkward horror. The crowd gasped. Phones were raised higher now. You could feel the shift in the air, an entire street flipping on its axis. From the sidewalk, Arielle whispered, "Marcus." He heard her voice like thunder, weak, broken, but real. And it changed everything. Marcus didn't blink. His hand was already pulling at the cruiser's back door handle, even as Officer Lane tried to sidestep between him and the car. But Marcus wasn't interested in confrontation. He was focused entirely on Arielle. "Step back, sir. I'm warning you," Lane barked. The threat didn't move Marcus. He had spent 15 years on the bench. He had heard every type of intimidation, watched every kind of abuse masked in a badge, but nothing, not a lifetime of rulings, not a decade of appeals, not even the most twisted cross-examination, prepared him for the moment he watched his pregnant wife writhe in pain, while someone in uniform played God. "Get away from the vehicle," Lane snapped again. "You kicked her." Marcus's voice was low, hollow, and deadly calm. "A pregnant woman. You tore her bag. You kicked her. You shoved her to the ground." Lane glanced around, then suddenly realized the growing crowd wasn't on his side. Phones were pointed at him from every direction. Even a few of the store employees had stepped out and were recording. Someone was shouting in the background, "That's Judge Bennett. He's a sitting judge." The pressure mounted quickly. Marcus didn't yell. He didn't flinch. He simply stepped into Lane's space and said, quietly, "If you touch your belt again, I promise you, you will not see the inside of a courtroom. You'll be under it." Lane took a step back. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. Arielle moaned behind the glass. Marcus turned, slammed his hand against the window and shouted, "Open this door." Then he faced the crowd. "Is anyone here a medic? She's pregnant. She's in pain." A woman in scrubs stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. "I'm a nurse practitioner," she shouted. Before Lane could intervene, she moved to the passenger side, knocking. "Let me check her." "Sir, please, let me help her." Just then, the courthouse doors swung open. Two uniformed courthouse security officers bolted down the steps. One of them, a tall black man named Terrell Hughes, had served under Marcus's leadership for years. He spotted Arielle in the cruiser and didn't hesitate. "Judge Bennett, what the hell? He needs medical attention now." Hughes didn't wait for a command. He moved around the car and physically pulled Lane back by the shoulder. "You're done, man. Back off." Lane resisted. "I was doing my job." "Your job is over," Hughes growled. "You assaulted a judge's wife while she was carrying." The crowd gasped again. Lane's face flushed. He turned, looked to the other officers now pouring out of the courthouse behind Hughes, and realized the entire street had shifted beneath his feet. Arielle's voice returned faintly through the window. "He kicked me." Marcus reached for the door handle again. This time, Hughes unlocked it from inside. As it opened, Arielle fell into Marcus's arms. The nurse rushed forward. "We need to elevate her legs, check for contractions and internal bleeding." Marcus held her tightly. "I'm here. I've got you. I've got you." Arielle trembled. "I was just getting oranges." "I know. I saw." The nurse pressed gently on her belly, listening closely. "She's conscious. No heavy bleeding yet, but she needs to be seen. Now." Sirens echoed down the street. Paramedics were on the way. Lane stood stiff, still near the cruiser, watching it all collapse. Cameras didn't stop rolling. No one rushed to defend him. This wasn't going away. The ambulance pulled up with a screech. 2 EMTs jumped out, lifting a gurney as Marcus gently laid Arielle onto it, his hands trembling at the edges. One of the EMTs asked her name and due date, jotting everything quickly on a clipboard, while the other checked her vitals. Her voice was weak, but steady. 7-month, baby girl. Her name's going to be Noelle. Marcus walked beside the stretcher, not letting go of her hand, even as they slid her into the ambulance. He turned to the crowd, his voice calm but firm. "Everyone recording, save it. Don't let it disappear. Don't let them rewrite this." As the ambulance doors closed, Arielle's eyes met his. "You'll come?" "Right behind you." And then, for the first time since the moment Lane raised his voice, Marcus turned away from his wife. His judicial composure dropped like a mask. His eyes narrowed at the man who started it all. Travis Lane stood still, fists clenched at his sides, defiant. But there was no badge strong enough to shield him from what was coming. Hughes stepped in again. "We're placing him on administrative hold." "Good enough," Marcus said. "He assaulted a civilian, a pregnant woman, my wife. You detain him." There was no roar, no rage, just the cold precision of a man who had issued thousands of rulings and knew the weight of justice. Marcus took out his phone and dialed the chief judge directly. The conversation was brief, clipped, and lethal. "Yes, there's been an incident. A pregnant woman was assaulted by Officer Travis Lane in full view of civilians. I witnessed it personally. Yes, my wife. I'm asking for emergency review. I'll forward the video immediately." He hung up and looked at Hughes. "Take him to holding, now." Lane's face went pale. "I didn't know who she was." Marcus walked toward him slowly. "It doesn't matter who she was. It matters what you did." Lane stammered. "She looked suspicious. I thought." "You thought wrong. And now you'll answer for it." With the weight of courthouse authority behind him, Marcus stepped aside as Hughes and another officer cuffed Lane's wrists and walked him down the same sidewalk where Arielle had fallen. Someone in the crowd yelled, "Shame!" Another, "He kicked a mother!" Phones recorded everything. The ambulance pulling away, the officer in cuffs, the judge staring with the grief of a man who'd almost lost everything. It didn't take long. Within 30 minutes, the footage was already circulating on social media. The hashtags exploded. A black pregnant and black, and the oranges and justice. One clip caught Arielle whispering, "Please, my baby," right before Lane threw her to the ground. Another showed Marcus cradling her and telling the world, this was no mistake. This was power abused. By the time Marcus made it to the hospital, he was already a trending headline. At the emergency room, nurses were on standby. Arielle was rushed into maternal trauma care. Doctors monitored the baby's heartbeat, checked for placental damage, and scanned for internal injuries. Marcus waited in the hallway, fists clenched, tie loosened, rage simmering just beneath the surface. Then the doctor came out. He looked tired, but relieved. Stable. The baby's okay, for now, but she needs rest, monitoring, and stress reduction. Marcus nodded slowly. "Can I see her?" The doctor nodded. "Just for a minute." Inside, Arielle lay in a hospital bed, an IV in her arm. Her hair fanned out across the pillow. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Is she okay?" Marcus walked over, knelt beside her. "She's strong, like her mother." Arielle let out a breath, half sob, half laughter. "I didn't think I'd make it. When he kicked me, I thought I'd lose her." You didn't. They stayed that way, his head resting near her hand, her fingers brushing through his hair. Two people stunned, but not broken, held together by love, loss narrowly escaped, and the sense that something much larger was coming. Because this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the whole city watching. And what they'd do next. The ambulance doors slammed shut with a mechanical finality. Inside, Arielle strapped to a gurney, her head lolling weakly to the side. Her hands remained over her stomach as if by instinct, her fingers barely brushing the edge of the baby bump that only hours ago had been glowing with excitement. Now it pulsed with dread. Paramedics barked vitals, checking monitors and oxygen flow. One of them, a younger black woman with trembling hands, kept glancing down at Arielle's face with something more than clinical urgency. There was recognition in her eyes. She'd seen the footage. As the sirens wailed through downtown, Marcus stood frozen on the courthouse steps, sleeves rolled up, phone pressed to his ear. The call with the governor had dropped 3 times already. He didn't wait for permission anymore. He was issuing commands. Legal, personal, righteous. His voice cut through the static like, "I want the arrest report. I want the dash cam. I want the precinct's chain of command by the time I reach the hospital." His law clerk tried to interject. "Judge Bennett, shouldn't we?" "No. That man kicked my wife while she was carrying our child. This isn't about law anymore. This is about war." Down the block, the crowd still hadn't dispersed. Spectators were no longer filming, they were discussing, debating, accusing. Some people were crying. A few had started organizing on the sidewalk, handing out flyers with a QR code to the now viral video. It had already been uploaded to every major platform, racking up shares by the second. The title read, "Racist Cop Kicks Pregnant Black Woman, Husband is the Judge." Inside the police precinct, panic simmered under the fluorescent lights. Sergeant Marla Jenkins, the desk supervisor, turned pale when she saw Officer Travis Lane being ushered in by 2 internal affairs investigators. He was still in his uniform, but his name tag was missing, and the blood on his boots hadn't dried. "I didn't know who she was," Lane hissed, trying to sound composed. "That's the point," snapped one of the investigators. "You shouldn't have to." Captain Delaney entered from the back, face red, tie loosened. "Put him in the interview room now." "But sure." "I said, now." Lane was pulled away, the clink of his belt echoing down the corridor. As the door slammed shut, Delaney turned to Jenkins and whispered, "This isn't a PR problem, this is a damn grenade." Back at the hospital, Marcus strode down the hallway with a single purpose. Every person he passed, nurses, security, even physicians, stepped aside. His robe was gone, replaced with a simple button-down shirt, now streaked with sweat and worry. His wedding band glinted under the fluorescent lights with every clenched fist at his side. But it was his eyes. He reached the emergency wing and pushed through the double doors without waiting. Inside, Arielle lay propped on a pillow, IV in her arm, a fetal monitor thumping quietly beside her. The steady rhythm of their baby's heartbeat filled the room like a prayer. It was fast, but strong. She turned her head toward him, her face pale but alert. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm okay, Marcus." He rushed to her side, gripping her hand. "You shouldn't have to say that," he said, voice trembling. "You should be home, resting, not fighting to breathe in a hospital bed because a coward in uniform couldn't see past his own hate." She closed her eyes briefly. "Did you see the video?" He nodded. "I'm not going to be quiet about this." "You won't have to," he replied, eyes locked on hers, "because I won't let them bury this, not this time." Just then, the door creaked open. A woman in a sharp gray suit stepped inside, clipboard in hand, her badge swinging from her hip. She had the air of someone who'd spent years learning how to be polite while delivering hell. "Judge Bennett," she said, offering a firm nod. "Special Investigator Diana Crowley, Internal Affairs. We're conducting an emergency inquiry into Officer Travis Lane's conduct. May I?" Marcus looked at Arielle, then back at Crowley. "Speak." Crowley took a breath, stepped closer to the foot of the bed, and lifted a thin manila folder. "We've received over 400 witness statements in under 2 hours. Video footage confirms excessive force, obstruction of justice, possible racial targeting. Officer Lane is currently in custody at the precinct and is not cooperating." Arielle blinked slowly. "He kicked me and then told me not to resist?" Crowley nodded solemnly. "We're compiling everything, but there's one thing you should know." She turned the folder around, revealing a still image clipped from the video, a frame where Lane's boot was caught mid-swing, Arielle's arms shielding her belly, oranges flying through the air. "This image," Crowley continued, "has just been shared by a national journalist. With over 5 million followers, civil rights groups are mobilizing. Public opinion is shifting. Fast." Arielle sat up slightly. "Good." Crowley tucked the folder under her arm. "The mayor is asking for a meeting. The police union has gone silent. We're expecting national news coverage by morning." Marcus let out a low breath. "Then we make sure they show the truth." Outside the hospital, the press was already arriving. Cameras clicked. Microphones rose like blades of grass after a storm. Protesters were beginning to line the sidewalk, holding signs that read, "Justice for Arielle, protect black mothers, and we are not safe." But none of them knew yet that the real storm hadn't even started. That night, the footage aired on every major network. The click, exactly 13 seconds longer, opened with Arielle Bennett's hand shielding her swollen stomach, the sun casting shadows across the sidewalk, and oranges rolling across the concrete like tiny, helpless witnesses. It ended with the moment Marcus Bennett ran to her side, shouting her name as sirens wailed in the distance. The nation froze. Cable anchors tried to speak with poise. They failed. Commentators wept on live TV. Hashtags surged across social platforms. Pregnancy suits against a ban of cruise. Racist cop. In the control rooms of city government, panic set in. Mayor Helen Rollins, once known for her iron grip and chilly press conferences, now paced the floor of City Hall, palms sweaty and heels clacking like a metronome of crisis. Her phone buzzed with angry donors, scared department heads, and civil rights leaders demanding action. She didn't want to fire anyone. She wanted the storm to pass. But the footage wasn't fading. It was being played on loop in Times Square. At the courthouse, Judge Marcus Bennett stood in chambers, with his judicial robe folded neatly on the desk. He wasn't wearing it anymore. He had something else in mind. When a reporter called out from the corridor asking if he had a statement, he turned calmly, squared his shoulders, and said, "That man put his boot into my unborn child. There will be no compromise." Then he closed the door behind him. Inside the hospital, Arielle held her stomach and looked out the window at the crowd forming below. Dozens of candles now flickered, held by strangers, young, old, brown, white, standing vigil in the night. She whispered to her unborn daughter, "You're already stronger than they know." And somewhere in a precinct across town, Officer Travis Lane sat in a holding cell, head in his hands, trembling because he finally understood. He hadn't just assaulted a black woman. He had kicked open the gates to a reckoning. And now, the world was watching. Marcus Bennett stood before the review board, sleeves rolled, jaw tight. Every legal advisor had urged him to step back from the case. Conflict of interest, public perception, but he refused. "They didn't attack a random woman," he said to the ethics panel. "My attack, my wife, my child, my courtroom. You want me to recuse myself? It's not justice, it retreat." His voice didn't shake. It never did. Not even when he was a junior attorney fresh out of Howard. Not when he became one of the youngest black judges appointed in the state. But today, even his calm carried a knife's edge. Meanwhile, Arielle sat in a sterile, cold deposition room in a medical support chair. Her hospital gown was tied carefully around her belly. Her lips were dry, her eyes puffy but focused. A city clerk brought her water. "You don't have to do this today," she said, gently. Arielle shook her head. "I do. If I wait, he wins. Again." Across the table sat Officer Travis Lane's lawyer, graying, smooth voice, and dripping with polite venom. "Ms. Bennett, I understand emotions are high, but let's focus on facts. When Officer Lane confronted you, did you comply with his directions immediately?" Arielle took a breath. "I was holding oranges. He accused me of theft. I explained I'd just left the market." "Did you produce a receipt?" "I was holding a bag of fruit. I was crossing the street." The lawyer leaned forward. "But you refused to present one when asked." "I didn't get the chance," she said evenly. "He tore the bag from my hand. Then he kicked me. I told him I was pregnant." There was a long pause. He tried again. "You're aware that resisting arrest, even passively, can escalate tension in these situations?" Arielle stared straight through him. "I wasn't resisting. I was bleeding." The city's assistant attorney, a white woman in a navy blazer, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Let's bring in the footage," she said, motioning toward the screen. "Let's allow the video to speak." The lights dimmed and the footage rolled. There was no sound at first, just the silent horror of a woman being kicked by a man in uniform. A slow-motion replay showed the oranges scattering across the sidewalk like marbles, the bag tearing as Arielle clutched her belly and crumpled to the ground. Then the audio kicked in. "Get on the ground. Pregnant. Please stop. Stop resisting." The courtroom-style setting fell into a suffocating silence. The city's assistant attorney swallowed hard. Her face, once composed and defensive, now showed a grim understanding of what had just played out in front of them all. Lane's attorney reached for a water bottle but fumbled. The video kept looping, each frame more damning than the last. Arielle didn't flinch. She sat straight, her face unreadable. It was the only way she knew how to survive this, by turning her body into a vessel of truth, not emotion. That was how her mother taught her. Her grandmother taught her. Her pain wasn't a performance, it was evidence. When the video ended, Lane's lawyer cleared his throat. "It's an unfortunate escalation." "Escalation?" Arielle interrupted quietly. "That wasn't an escalation. That was an execution attempt on a woman, a black woman, who was doing nothing but carrying fruit and a child." The city attorney shifted in her seat again. She leaned forward, her voice lower now. "Mrs. Becky, the city expresses deep regret for what you've been through." "Regret," Arielle said, her voice like stone. "But not accountability?" Before anyone could respond, a knock came at the door. A court bailiff entered and whispered to Marcus. He stood, nodded once, and gestured for the visitor to enter. It was a woman, mid-30s, Latina, wearing a plain gray cardigan and jeans. Her eyes flicked toward Arielle, then toward the lawyer. "My name is Officer Luisa Vega," she said. "I work out of the same precinct as Officer Lane, and I need to speak with Judge Bennett." The room changed. Marcus crossed the floor and shook her hand. "You're the one who called?" She nodded. "I've been holding this for too long. Officer Lane's assault on your wife. It's not the first." She pulled a flash drive from her coat pocket and set it on the table. Internal complaints, body cam footage, everything. I downloaded the archive before they could wipe it. Arielle's hands clutched the armrest tightly. "How many?" she whispered. Vega hesitated. 4. That I know of. 2 were teenagers. 1 was a street vendor. All black or Latino. Every one of them filed complaints. Every one of those complaints was marked resolved without follow-up. The city attorney turned ghost pale. That would be a systemic failure. Vega shook her head. It wasn't failure, it was cover-up. Marcus took the flash drive and placed it beside his notepad. "You prepared to testify?" "I am. I've already written a full statement. I'll be submitting it to the Department of Justice, and I've asked to be placed on administrative leave for my safety." For the first time in days, Arielle felt something flicker behind her ribs. Not relief, not yet, but something close to a beginning. The city attorney finally found her voice again. "Judge Bennett, I think we need to reconvene. There are decisions that need to be made at a much higher level." Marcus stood behind his wife, placing both hands gently on her shoulders. "No more delays," he said. "No more shields. We don't pause this because it's uncomfortable. We move forward because it's necessary." Arielle's voice was calm, but forceful. "He kicked me like I was garbage. That doesn't get negotiated. It gets remembered." By the time the sun dipped low behind the courthouse dome, the building had become a battle flag of whispers. Lawyers huddled in corners. City officials texted rapidly behind closed doors. Rumors had started to spread about the flash drive, about past victims, about what could come next. Arielle sat quietly in the witness waiting room, a blanket draped over her lap, her hospital band still around her wrists. Her hands were clasped loosely over her belly, which rose and fell steadily, a soft rhythm, proof of survival. Marcus stepped in, his face unreadable. He crossed the room in silence and took her hand. "They're rattled," he said. "The city just called an emergency ethics session. DOJ is sending someone by Friday." Arielle's lips parted slightly, then closed again. The fatigue had settled into her bones now, not just her body. Still, her voice held no fragility. "And Lane?" Pending investigation. But with what we have now," he shook his head, "he won't be wearing that badge again." Arielle looked toward the hallway, where the deposition room stood dark and empty. "I kept thinking, what if I hadn't dropped that bag of oranges? What if no one had filmed it?" Marcus looked at her, his eyes full of quiet fury. "You'd still be bruised, still be broken, still be blamed." They sat in silence, letting the weight of truth settle between them. Then the door creaked again. Linda Avery, director of the local community center, stepped in, with Officer Vega at her side. Linda held a stack of papers. "I thought you should see this." She laid the stack gently on the table. Complaint forms, handwritten notes, signed affidavits, all from people who had crossed paths with Lane and never been believed. "She are ready to talk now," Linda said. "The video gave them permission. Your voice gave them courage." Arielle stared at the pages. Names she didn't know, stories she'd never heard, pain woven into ink. "I wasn't trying to be anyone's voice," she said. Linda nodded. "You were anyway." Behind them, the courthouse lights flickered on, illuminating the night with a cold white glow. But inside that room, something far warmer pulsed between them. An understanding, a call to action. It wasn't over, but it had begun. The morning after Arielle's deposition, the world shifted. It started with a headline. One small article, posted to a local investigative blog, barely formatted, but the title hit like thunder across the digital sky. Internal Affairs Memo. Officer Travis Lane has history of violence against black women. It wasn't rumor. It wasn't anonymous. The reporter cited a leaked dossier, nearly 60 pages long, from inside the sheriff's office. Arielle saw it from her hospital bed. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the opening line. Officer Lane has had 13 use-of-force complaints, including multiple involving pregnant and elderly black women, all dismissed without external review. Her hand clenched the bedsheet. The baby kicked lightly beneath her hospital gown, as if responding to her fury. In the hallway outside, Nurses whispered. One nurse peeked through the glass door and gave Arielle a gentle nod. Soft eyes that said, "I see you." By midday, the article had been shared across every major platform. Then came the screenshots. Then came the outrage. A journalist from Atlanta tweeted, "This isn't one bad cop. This is institutional permission." And then the photo. Arielle didn't know how it had gotten out. Maybe a nurse, maybe a friend. But it was a raw, heartbroken image. Her face pale, her body bruised, her hospital gown gathered over her knees, her hand gently holding her stomach. The caption beneath the image read, "He was buying oranges. He said she was stealing. Then he kicked her unborn child." It went viral in 2 hours. By the end of the day, celebrities, public officials, even presidential candidates were quoting her words from the deposition. "Our baby could have died, and he didn't even blink." Judge Marcus Bennett stood outside the hospital that evening, flanked by security and a microphone stand that hadn't been there the day before. His voice didn't shake. "They want me to recuse myself. They say I'm too close to this. Let me make this clear. I am this. My wife is lying in that hospital bed because an officer decided he could treat her like an animal. If that disqualifies me from seeking justice, then we have a bigger problem than we thought." The video clips that followed told a story far more damning than any press release could. One showed Lane shoving a handcuffed teenager against a patrol car. No provocation, no resistance. Another showed a 64-year-old woman screaming in pain after Lane helped her out of her seat by yanking her wrist. In one disturbing body cam snippet, Lane barked at a sobbing, pregnant woman, "You think that belly protects you?" None of this had been public before. And each video was paired with an official report claiming subject was non-compliant, minimal force used, or no further investigation necessary. People had questions, angry ones. How had he stayed on the force? How had Sheriff Bell signed off on all of it? The answers came quicker than anyone expected, because someone inside had had enough. A whistleblower, their identity masked by legal protections, leaked transcripts, emails, and audio recordings from inside internal affairs. One of the most shocking was a memo from 6 months earlier. Removal. Officer Lane. Recommend disciplinary action following third citizen complaint involving minority female suspect in less than 12 weeks. Pattern of aggressive conduct escalating. Strongly urge suspension pending evaluation. The recommendation had been stamped with a single word, denied, initially by Sheriff Bell himself. The public response was volcanic. In cities across the state, demonstrations erupted, peaceful at first, but fierce in voice and message. Arielle's hospital photo was held up like a banner. Her name, her unborn child, her pain, they had become a symbol. And she didn't hide. With Marcus standing beside her and her doctor watching carefully, Arielle made her first public statement from her hospital bed. It was streamed live on multiple platforms. No lights, no fancy makeup, just truth. "I didn't choose this fight," she began. "I didn't wake up that morning thinking I'd end up on the sidewalk, clutching my baby in pain while a man with a badge screamed at me like I was less than human." She paused, breathed, then continued, I, this isn't just about me. I know too many others have stories just like mine. Or worse, I was lucky. I had a husband who could call for backup. But what if I hadn't? How many women's names didn't go viral?" She reached over, touched her belly. This baby was kicked before she ever took a breath. But maybe she'll be born into a town that's finally ready to change. The live stream flooded with comments. Tears, rage, hope. One viewer wrote, "I live in this town, and I'm marching tomorrow." Another, "No more silence, no more shielding these monsters." The district attorney's office went on defense. Public pressure skyrocketed. Community leaders demanded immediate disciplinary action, and then something unprecedented happened. Sheriff Bell resigned. In a 2-paragraph statement sent to local media, he said, "This moment requires trust. I no longer believe I can lead this department forward." No apology, no accountability, just an exit. But that didn't slow things down, it accelerated them. Lane, already suspended, now faced a formal motion to terminate. His union scrambled, his attorney begged for time to let the dust settle. But Marcus, now in full judicial armor, refused to let this die in darkness. He issued an emergency hearing order to publicly unseal Lane's complaint records and IA history. That night, in homes across the city, families sat in front of their TVs and phones, watching as the raw documentation scrolled across the screen. 3 involving minors, 4 involving pregnant or elderly black women. 0 sustained, 0 discipline. The truth was no longer buried. It was now the bonfire at the center of a reckoning. And Arielle Bennett, bandaged, bruised but unbroken, was the spark that lit the match. The days that followed moved fast, too fast for the department to catch its breath. 3 captains resigned in the same afternoon. Internal memos leaked again, revealing that several supervisors had signed off on Lane's misconduct with full knowledge of the pattern. An anonymous tip linked one of the IA supervisors to a local security firm which had received quiet contracts approved by Sheriff Bell. Contracts Lane helped enforce through intimidation. One text message, obtained by a journalist, simply read, "Lane clears the way, no complaints after he knocks." The community, inflamed with both outrage and purpose, organized with breathtaking efficiency. Mothers printed Arielle's hospital photo onto T-shirts. Local pastors hosted forums titled, "What They Did to Her, They've Done to Us All." Veterans, teachers, and grandmothers formed a human chain in front of the courthouse, holding hands in silence. Even children carried signs, "Protect moms, not monsters," drawn in crayon and glitter. Arielle's name became a chant, not just of protest, but of awakening. She sat in a wheelchair near the hospital window, Marcus by her side. Their unborn daughter had survived, and every flutter in Arielle's womb now felt like a reminder this story wasn't over. It was just beginning. That evening, a national reporter asked Arielle what she hoped would come of all this. Her voice was calm, certain. He watched the system that protected him dismantled. "I want the silence broken, and I want my daughter to be born into a world where no one ever calls what happened to me a misunderstanding again." The next morning, the lead headline read, "Racist Cop's Record Exposed, Pregnant Mother's Assault Unprotected, End of Life, Death, Unites." And under it, a subheading that finally told the truth. Survived, and now she's making sure others don't have to. The pressure mounted. The state attorney general launched a formal investigation into the department's internal affairs process. Grand jury proceedings were expedited. DOJ observers arrived at the courthouse the following week. What began with a kick on a sidewalk had turned into a national flashpoint for justice. Arielle, resting, recovering, and rising, had become more than a name and a headline. She had become a movement, fueled by truth, strengthened by pain, and protected by the unbreakable bond of a community that refused to look away ever again. The Civic Center parking lot was full before sunset. Cars stretched down side streets, and folding chairs inside the building were claimed hours in advance. Outside, speakers had been set up for the overflow crowd. People came with handwritten signs, with baby carriers, with anger, and with hope. Some wore Justice for Arielle shirts. Everyone knew this was the reckoning. Inside, the energy was electric but tense. Cameras from local and national media crews framed the stage. At the center sat a long table where officials from the police department, city council, and DA's office were seated. A single microphone stood on the floor, open for public comment. Then the doors parted. A hush fell over the crowd as Arielle Bennett stepped in. No makeup, no blazer, just a soft navy moule maternity dress and flats. One hand beneath her belly, the other gripping Marcus's. She walked slowly but deliberately down the center aisle, her presence louder than a speech. The MC didn't introduce her. He didn't have to. Arielle stepped to the microphone. Her voice was low at first, measured, almost reverent. Looked at me and saw a threat. The room froze. They didn't see a woman walking home. They didn't see someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone 7 months pregnant. They saw black, and that was enough. Gasp rippled through the crowd. Some older women wiped tears. A few in the back stood. She continued, her voice trembling but growing stronger. I begged. I said I was pregnant. He looked me in the eye and kicked me anyway. And then he screamed at me to stop resisting, as if the pain was something I'd chose. Marcus stood behind her, arms crossed tight over his chest, jaw clenched. But he let her speak. The spotlight wasn't his. Arielle pointed toward the officials seated across the room. Many more of us have to be brutalized before this town says enough. How many bruised bodies? How many stolen voices? How many crushed oranges on a sidewalk before we matter? There was no sound in the room except her breath. Then, softly, a single person clapped. Then another. Then 10. Then the room erupted into a thunderous wave of applause and stomping feet. Arielle stepped back from the mic, her face streaked with tears. She hadn't come to perform, she had come to tell the truth. And the town was finally ready to hear it. As the applause faded, the microphone stood empty for a moment. Then, slowly, a teenage boy stepped forward. He wore a hoodie with his school's logo and sneakers that squeaked as he walked. He looked no older than 16. His voice was shaky, but he didn't hesitate. My name's Jalen. Last year, Officer Lane slammed me to the sidewalk outside the corner store. Said I matched a description. I had headphones in. Didn't even hear him at first. I had a bag of chips in one hand, my phone in the other. He broke my wrist when he cuffed me. The room was silent again. Mom filed a complaint. Nothing happened. They said his body cam was off. Jalen looked down, then up. But I remember the way he looked at me, like I wasn't real, like I was already guilty. He turned to Arielle, his voice softer. I saw the video of what he did to you. I'm sorry. I wanted to say thank you for not staying quiet. Arielle's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus reached over and took her other hand, his grip trembling. The MC nodded solemnly and gestured to the next speaker. A woman in her 60s stood. She wore a faded cardigan and a long skirt, and her eyes were fierce behind wire-rimmed glasses. I've lived in this town all my life, she said, and I've seen it all. My grandson was arrested last summer for loitering. He was waiting for me outside the grocery store. She paused. Her lip quivered. They put him in a holding cell for 2 days. He missed his college entrance exam. You know what that did to him? Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. Started saying maybe they were right. That maybe he didn't belong in college. That maybe he was nothing. She locked eyes with the police chief seated on stage. You didn't just put him in a cell. You put something in his heart he's still trying to get out. Another voice rose from the crowd. A teacher this time, then a nurse, then a former military veteran. One after another they came forward, not just to speak, but to testify. Some read from crumpled paper, others spoke from memory. With fire and pain and long-held rage, they told of traffic stops that turned violent, of quiet warnings passed around in whispers. Don't go down that street after dark. Stay quiet if you see Officer Lane. The room pulsed with truth, and with each story, the illusion that this was ever about a single incident shattered completely. It had never been just about Arielle. It had always been about all of them. When the last speaker stepped down, a hush fell over the town hall. The microphone stood empty again, as if daring someone to challenge the truth that had just flooded the room. The weight of it all hung heavy. Trauma that had lived in silence now exposed under harsh fluorescent lights, impossible to ignore. Then came a sharp scraping sound. Sheriff Bell pulled his chair back and stood. He was a broad man, with graying hair and a polished badge that caught the light, but nothing about him seemed bright now. He looked tired, worn, and for the first time, vulnerable. He cleared his throat and reached for the mic. I came here tonight hoping to explain, hoping to bring understanding. The crowd shifted. After what I've heard, I realize I don't need to speak. I need to listen. Someone in the back shouted, "Too late for that." Others murmured in agreement. He raised a hand, not in defiance, but in surrender. I didn't know the extent. That's not an excuse. That's a failure. A failure I take responsibility for. Another voice, sharper this time. You knew about Lane. The sheriff faltered. I knew. Complaints had come in, but they were handled internally. I trusted the process. Marcus stood slowly from his seat next to Arielle. He didn't yell. His voice was calm, but firm. You trusted a process designed to protect itself, not the people. Bell opened his mouth, but there were no words left. He gave a faint nod, placed the mic back on its stand, and stepped aside. Arielle looked around the room. She felt every eye on her, every breath held, waiting. She stood. There was no podium now, no platform, just a battered folding chair she had used as support, and a worn community center rug beneath her flats. Her dress was simple. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice carried. Looked at me, she said, and didn't see a woman, didn't see a mother, didn't see a human being. She paused. They saw a threat. Gasps moved through the crowd, soft but sharp. Arielle stepped forward. Then I'm still standing, and am still pregnant, and am still here. Applause swelled, then roared. It wasn't polite. It was full-throated and defiant. People stood. Chairs scraped against floors. Claps turned into fists raised high. Marcus joined her on stage. He wrapped one arm around her, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was there not as a judge tonight, but as a husband, and as a man standing beside a woman who had shaken the ground beneath their town. Cameras captured it all. The newspapers called it the reckoning at Town Hall. News anchors looped Arielle's speech. The clip went viral. Millions of views, tens of thousands of shares. But in that room it wasn't about virality. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen. It was about voices, long buried, rising as one. Outside, people spilled onto the sidewalks. Some lit candles, others chanted. More just held each other in silence. No arrests were made that night. But a message had been delivered. And nothing in that town would ever be the same. The courthouse steps looked different now. There was no blood on the pavement, no oranges scattered like broken symbols of innocence. The sun was just as bright, but the weight in the air had shifted. Federal agents lined the walkway, calm, composed, every move deliberate. Their black susues created a barrier around the perimeter. Journalists clustered on the sidewalks, microphones pointed, lenses zoomed. A nation was watching. Inside the building, footsteps echoed, slow, heavy, final. Sheriff Bell was in his office when the door opened without a knock. He looked up, startled, and for a moment his instinct was to stand. But then he saw the two federal agents, badges already out, one hand near a holstered weapon, and he sank back down. "Horrifying, mouthed Bell," the taller agent said. "You're being served with a federal warrant for civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." Bell blinked slowly. "This is political." "No, sir," the agent replied. "This is overdue." They cuffed him without a fight. No shouting, no excuses. Just the sound of cold steel tightening around flesh. As they escorted him down the hallway, courthouse staff turned to look. Some whispered. Others said nothing. But nobody came to his defense. Outside, the news broke live. "We're witnessing history unfold," the anchor said. "Sheriff Malcolm Bell, once considered untouchable in this county, is now under arrest for crimes tied to decades of systemic abuse." At that moment, Arielle Bennett sat quietly on a wooden bench across the courthouse lawn, her hands folded over her belly, breath steady. She was in a soft blue dress, the very one she'd been wearing on the day she was kicked. The bruises had faded, the memory had not. The sirens blared again. Another SUV pulled in. From the back seat stepped Officer Travis Lane, pale and agitated, his wrists already cuffed. He was being escorted by a black federal agent in a dark suit, face unreadable, steps precise. Lane tried to speak, tried to twist the moment into something else, but his voice cracked in his throat. The agent didn't stop, didn't look at him, just walked him toward the steps where it all began. The crowd grew larger, and as Travis Lane passed by the exact spot where Arielle had once laid, sobbing in pain, with her unborn child at risk, his eyes met hers. She didn't flinch, didn't move. She only whispered 2 words. "Us." The cameras didn't blink. The country had seen the footage. The oranges rolling. The kick that dropped a pregnant woman to her knees. The desperate cry for her baby's safety. But today, they were seeing something new. Consequences. Officer Travis Lane was led up the courthouse steps in silence. No hand on his gun, no swagger, just the clink of cuffs behind his back and the press of accountability at his heels. Reporters shouted questions. "Officer Lane, do you regret what happened? Do you have anything to say to the Bennett family?" He said nothing. His mouth moved, but the words never came. Arielle sat still, her presence louder than any crowd. There was no applause, no cheers, just eyes locked on the man who once saw her as disposable. The courthouse doors opened for him, not as a protector, but as a prisoner. Flashbulbs popped. Judge Marcus Bennett stood just inside the building, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the man who had nearly taken everything from him. A deputy tried to divert him, but Marcus held his ground. The agent escorting Lane gave a slight nod, permission almost. And Lane, rattled, humiliated, had to walk past the very man whose family he had violated. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice. But his silence was a thunderclap in Lane's ears. Behind them, Arielle's mind drifted to that morning, the way the oranges had bounced down the sidewalk, bruised and broken. The way the sun had made everything look so peaceful, until it wasn't. The way she had said, "Please," and it hadn't mattered. But now it did. She reached into her bag and pulled out an orange. Unpeeled, whole, undamaged, one of them. She held it in her hand, resting it against the curve of her belly. A quiet defiance. A simple message. I survived. We survived. The press didn't miss it. By nightfall, that image, Arielle Bennett, sitting quietly on a bench, holding an orange over her pregnant belly, while her attacker was marched in cuffs behind her, had become the front page of newspapers across the country. A New York Times headline read, "From Injustice to Reckoning, a Pregnant Woman's Quiet Stand." CNN aired a special segment, "The Kick Seen Around the World." Social media erupted, hashtags trended, pregnant and targeted, orange for truth, hungry for truth, a surge-loaded virgin. And in homes across America, people watched. Some cried, some shouted in rage, but nearly all of them felt something shifting, something that couldn't be ignored anymore. Arielle didn't post anything herself. She didn't need to. Her silence said it all. In the courthouse basement, processing paperwork for Officer Lane's detention, a young black clerk paused. She looked at the file, then at the chain of names being uncovered in the investigation. Her fingers trembled slightly as she added one more. Then she turned to her colleague. "I used to think no one would ever believe us," she said. "Now they have to." Meanwhile, federal agents served subpoenas to internal records, surveillance footage, body cam data, citizen complaints once buried under red tape, now brought to the surface. The dam was breaking. One by one, cracks formed in the walls built to silence. Arielle stood from the bench as the final cruiser pulled away. Marcus met her halfway across the lawn. He wrapped an arm around her, gently, protectively, reverent. "We're just getting started," he whispered. And she nodded, the orange still in her hand. It wasn't just Lane. By morning, Sheriff Bell's face was splashed across the local news. Handcuffed, red-faced, being escorted from his home in slippers and a stained department polo shirt. He had tried to act shocked, had tried to bark orders at the agents, but when the federal paperwork landed on his kitchen counter, with the words civil rights violations, evidence suppression, and conspiracy, his voice crumbled. Inside the sheriff's office, agents gathered hard drives and confidential memos. What they found was damning. Memos signed by Bell instructing his deputies to maintain visual dominance in predominantly neighborhoods. A spreadsheet marked with coded notes: frequent walker, loud mouth, looks uncooperative. In some cases, there were photos of teens with "flag for patrol" written across their faces. Arielle sat in a nearby conference room with federal monitors reviewing the files. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. They could see it all on her face: the grief, the strength, the resolve. She flipped one folder open and paused. A name, a date, a boy she'd taught in Sunday school, labeled monitor for disruption. He'd been arrested 2 years ago for loitering. Arielle remembered. He'd been waiting on a ride home from church. "This isn't law enforcement," one agent muttered. "This is targeting. This is hate in paperwork." Arielle turned to him. "And that's what hit me. That's what hit my baby." He nodded. When she stepped outside again, protesters were gathered in the distance. Peaceful, prayerful, holding oranges in the air like lanterns. A woman wept quietly, clutching her own pregnant belly. A teenage boy held a hand-lettered sign: "She walked so we could stand." Another held a photo of Arielle on the bench, the orange in her palm glowing in the sun. A news van rolled by slowly, filming live. One reporter spoke to camera. "Today, this isn't just about an arrest. This is about accountability. Finally catching up to a system built to crush people like Arielle Bennett. The courthouse steps are no longer a stage for injustice. Today, they became a reckoning." Inside the precinct, one deputy sat shaking in his chair. He'd watched Lane assault Arielle, had seen the footage a dozen times now. He had done nothing that day, and now he was being asked to explain why. He looked up at the federal agent. "Because that's what we were told. Because silence kept our jobs safe." The agent didn't blink. Not anymore. By the end of the day, 6 more officers had been placed on administrative leave. 2 retired abruptly. 1 turned whistleblower. And for the first time in years, people in the community dared to believe, maybe, just maybe, justice didn't always have to arrive late. That night, Arielle and Marcus sat on their porch light dim, the town quieter than usual. The wind rustled the trees. Arielle leaned back, her hands resting on the curve of her belly. "You think it's over?" she asked softly. "Mercy," Marcus said, "but I think it's finally beginning." She nodded, eyes distant. "He'll grow up in a different town. Because we demanded it." A soft knock came at the door. A young girl from down the street stood there, holding a bag of oranges. She didn't say anything, just handed it over, then ran back to her mother waiting at the sidewalk. Arielle looked down, then smiled. One orange had a heart drawn on it. Marcus grinned. "Looks like we've started something." The chamber was quiet, almost sacred in its stillness. Long oak benches faced the elevated dais where the state committee sat. Judges, legislators, and observers gathered beneath ornate lighting, the air thick with anticipation. In the center stood Arielle Bennett, her hospital gown long gone, replaced with a soft cream blouse and a baby moon daughter close against her chest. She stood, not as a victim, but as a woman transformed by the unthinkable and determined to speak. "My name," she began, her voice calm, "is Arielle Bennett. I am a mother, a wife, a community volunteer, and I was kicked in the stomach by a police officer while 7 months pregnant." Gasps fluttered through the room, though many already knew her story. But hearing it from her routed. Real. Marcus sat behind her in the gallery. His hand rested on his knee, knuckles white, his jaw tight with pride and pain. He had heard every word she rehearsed the night before. Still, hearing them now, with his child sleeping softly against her mother's heartbeat, carried a gravity no legal transcript could capture. Arielle turned slightly, just enough for the room to see the bundle wrapped to her chest. "She's here, alive, because by some miracle, that officer's boot didn't take her from me. But this isn't just about what happened to me." She placed a hand on the podium, fingers steady. "This Oriostera that saw me saw a black woman with a grocery bag and decided I was a threat. This is about a system that trained that officer to fear me, to assume I was stealing, that the way I looked, where I walked, what I carried, made me suspicious." Across the room, a state senator shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Another, a white woman from the Northern District, bowed her head, as if in prayer. Journalists scribbled furiously. The cameras stayed silent, but rolling. Arielle continued. "Officer Lane had 13 prior complaints, some nearly identical to what he did to me. Pregnant women, elderly women, black women, and he stayed on the street." The baby stirred and cooed softly. Arielle instinctively pressed her lips to the top of her child's head. A moment of maternal tenderness, captured in full by every camera lens in the room. She looked up again, her voice trembling, but not with fear, with truth. This wasn't a mistake. It was trained. It was allowed. It was ignored. Silence hung in the air like a held breath. Then Arielle leaned closer to the microphone, her eyes sweeping across the long bench of lawmakers, her voice gentle but firm. "I didn't come here today to ask for vengeance. That's not what this is about. I came here because no woman should have to walk with her hand on her belly in fear of the people who are supposed to protect her. No mother should wonder if a badge means safety or danger." From his seat behind her, Marcus blinked hard. His arm rested on the back of the bench, behind Arielle's chair. The baby gurgled again, one tiny fist peeking from the wrap, oblivious to the gravity of the moment. A state representative in his 50s leaned forward, removing his glasses to wipe his eyes. Another woman on the panel pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Arielle continued, "We don't want special treatment. We want fairness, dignity. We want our children to grow up knowing the law protects them, not profiles them. That an officer's uniform represents service, not surveillance. That the color of their skin or the neighborhood they live in doesn't make them a suspect before they..." She inhaled, the pause filled with the weight of history, of mothers and grandmothers and daughters whose names never made it to hearings like this. I'd met others like me, women who were too afraid to speak, who didn't survive what I survived. Their stories were buried, dismissed, ignored, or sealed in internal affairs reports that never saw the light of day. Murmurs of agreement rippled from the public seating behind the committee. Among them sat Ava Thompson, a retired librarian whose granddaughter had been detained at 17 over a pack of gum. Next to her, Luis Moreno, whose sister had miscarried after being slammed against a squad car years ago. No officer punished, no charges filed. These stories had lived in the shadows for too long, but now they rose. One voice. "I'm not here because I'm strong," Arielle said softly. "I am here because I had to be. I had no choice. Because my daughter deserves to live in a world that believes her life matters. That my life mattered." A brief pause. No one moved. Not the senators, not the media, not even the aides who normally fidgeted through these long hearings. Every soul in the room was locked in, held in the truth of her voice. And if telling my story, this story, can help build that world, then I will tell it again and again and again. A sharp click sounded as a reporter's pen dropped to the floor. Somewhere in the crowd, a quiet amen whispered out. Then Arielle closed her statement with 6 words, the final line she and Marcus had rehearsed for hours. This was never just about me. And the room erupted, not in chaos, but in applause, slow at first, then growing. Not everyone clapped. Some bowed their heads, others nodded through tears, but no one walked away unchanged. Chairwoman Eunice Radley, a veteran lawmaker and former civil rights attorney, cleared her throat. Mrs. Bennett, thank you. Your bravery speaks louder than any report we've reviewed this year. We have work to do. Arielle stepped back. Marcus stood. They embraced tightly. And behind them, the baby nestled closer into her mother's chest, her tiny face turned toward the light. The hearing took a short recess, but no one really left the room. People stood in small clusters, not talking politics or policy, but sharing memories. Real ones, names and faces, cases and neighbors. A woman from Mobile whispered about her son who'd been stopped 14 times in a single year. A man from Birmingham spoke of his uncle who was arrested for loitering outside his own barbershop. The pain was generational, but for the first time, it was being acknowledged. Behind the dais, aides passed notes to the chair. A draft proposal had been quietly printed and distributed. The first line read, "The Arielle Act, an act to establish oversight, transparency, and civil protection standards in law enforcement." It wasn't just symbolic. It included real teeth, mandatory federal audits for departments with repeated misconduct complaints, public access to body cam records, disciplinary histories unsealed for violent offenses, and protections for whistleblowers. But most importantly, it proposed the creation of a civilian-led integrity council in every county. Arielle's story had sparked a movement, but this was how it would make law. Eunice Radley reconvened the session. Her gavel struck gently. Let the record reflect that committee members will now deliberate on the immediate forwarding of the Arielle Act to the full chamber. Applause again. Even some opposition members nodded with solemn expressions. A cultural line had been crossed, one that couldn't be erased with a press release or a resignation. Later that night, footage of Arielle's testimony aired on national television. Not the raw kind of viral video that showed pain in real time. This was the aftermath, the fight for meaning, for justice. Her calm voice, her baby resting in her arms, her husband sitting behind her like a silent vow. Social media exploded with support. The Arielle Act trended within hours. Civil rights groups released statements of solidarity. Churches and mosques shared her speech at gatherings. Even late-night hosts paused their comedy to recognize the moment. And in a quiet room back home, Arielle sat in a rocking chair, her baby sleeping against her chest. Marcus knelt beside them, resting his head gently against her knee. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she replied, stroking the child's back. "We're just getting started." In that moment, no title, no bench, no courtroom mattered more than the unity they felt as a family, as survivors, as changemakers. And as the moonlight spilled through the window, soft and steady, it carried the weight of something greater than justice. It carried the promise of a future that was finally being rewritten. The morning sun stretched softly across the town square, painting golden streaks across newly paved streets and freshly scrubbed sidewalks. Birds chirped from street lamps as banners fluttered gently in the breeze. They read, "Justice has a name." Beneath them stood a newly unveiled sign, elegant and bold in black and gold lettering, "The Arielle Bennett Justice Center." Families gathered in front of the civic building, their voices a mix of quiet anticipation and soft laughter. A small podium stood at the base of the steps, those same courthouse steps where, not long ago, a woman's cries had echoed against the concrete. and hearts had shattered at the sight of brutality. Today, those steps bore something entirely different: hope. Arielle walked slowly across the courtyard, one hand pushing a navy moon stroller, the other holding the hand of her husband, Judge Marcus Bennett. She wore a simple white dress with soft yellow flowers, her hair loose and shining in the light. Inside the stroller, their baby cooed and kicked his feet. A wide, toothless grin stretched across his round cheeks. The crowd parted as they approached, nodding, smiling, some with tears in their eyes. Children stood with homemade signs. One read, "Thank you, Miss Arielle." Another had a crayon drawing of a woman with oranges all around her, surrounded by hearts. Arielle glanced up at the building. Her gaze lingered on the large mural that now covered the side wall, a vibrant image of herself with her arms open as wings, eyes lifted toward the sky, and oranges suspended mid-air behind her, frozen in time. It was more than art. It was memory. It was defiance. It was grace. Marcus turned to her, voice low but proud. "They couldn't bury you. They couldn't silence you. You became the anthem." She nodded, swallowing emotion. "They tried to erase my name. Now they teach it in civics class." The mayor stepped forward, a younger black woman named Councilwoman Rena Carter, who had once sat in the crowd listening to Arielle's town hall speech. Today, she wore the mayor's sash. She cleared her throat, her voice trembling with honor. "This town once carried the weight of silence, but today we raise a name that means dignity, protection, and power." Arielle Bennett stood when others were told to sit. She spoke when others were told to hush. She bled and she led. And now, we name this Justice Center in her honor, not for her pain, but for her power. The crowd erupted into applause, a standing ovation that lasted longer than expected. Babies were hoisted, hands were clasped, tears were shed. Justice, it seemed, had a sound, and it was deafening. Arielle stepped to the podium, breath steady. She lifted her eyes, locking with hundreds of faces, some familiar, some new. She smiled gently and began to speak. "I don't stand here because I wanted to," Arielle began, her voice calm, strong. "I stand here because I had to." The square fell quiet, the way a church hushes before the first note of a hymn. Arielle took a breath, her fingers gently resting on the edge of the podium. "I was walking home, that's all. I had a bag of oranges. I was humming a lullaby to a child I hadn't met yet. I didn't know then that something so simple could be so threatening in someone else's eyes. A pregnant black woman with fruit became a suspect, became a target, became a threat." Gasps and murmurs swept through the audience, even from those who had heard her story before. Arielle paused only briefly. "It kicked me so hard I thought I'd never breathe again. I remember the sound of the oranges hitting the pavement, rolling away like witnesses, too afraid to speak. I remember his voice screaming over mine. I remember thinking, 'My baby, please, not my baby.'" She looked down at the stroller. Her baby gurgled and swung a little stuffed bear by the leg. The moment swelled, emotional and tender. "Maria de la Berta, and my baby didn't die. And this town, it didn't stay quiet." Applause rippled, but she lifted a hand gently, asking them to let her continue. "I gave a deposition. I told the truth, and truth became a video. A video became a movement became justice. And justice is why this building behind me now bears a name it once tried to silence." She turned slightly toward the Justice Center. "Dismissed, mine. But every name that was once buried by fear and denial, every woman called aggressive for daring to survive, every child targeted before they even spoke, every man who spoke out and was told to sit down." Arielle let the words settle. A hush fell again, deeper this time. "You don't have to wear a robe to stand for justice. You don't have to carry a gavel or a badge. Sometimes all you have to carry is the memory of what was done, and the will to never let it happen again." She reached down, lifted her son from the stroller. He nestled easily into her arms, resting his head on her shoulder. We named him Elias, after my grandfather. He was born 2 months after the attack. He came out strong, loud, and hungry. A few chuckles rose gently. Every time I hold him, I remember the pain. But I also remember the power. Not mine alone, ours. This community, this crowd. You stood up when it mattered. You shouted when it was dangerous. You marched when they said go home. And because of you, Elias will grow up in a town that finally learned how to listen. A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She stood tall, baby on her hip, voice unwavering. We still have work to do. We always will. But this building, she glanced again at the bold new sign behind her. This building says we're not going back. The dedication ceremony drew to a close, but no one moved. People stayed in their seats. Some stood in quiet clusters, eyes lifted to the new mural on the courthouse wall. It was breathtaking. Arielle's likeness was painted in rich color, mid-stride, oranges tumbling from her hands in the background, caught mid-air like captured truth. Her arms were raised, not in surrender, but like wings unfolding, bold and soft at the same time, unbroken. Beside the mural was a quote in gold. They tried to erase my name. Now they teach it in civics class. Marcus joined her on the steps, dressed simply. No robe, no courtroom gravity, just a proud husband and a changed man. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He slipped an arm around her waist and kissed the top of her head. "You ready to go?" he asked quietly. Arielle nodded, but she looked around one last time. The children playing in the square, the elders smiling with pride. Protest signs now folded neatly under chairs, replaced with clipboards and registration forms. They were planning, not just protesting. As they turned to leave, a little girl ran up and tapped Arielle's leg. She couldn't have been older than 6. "Miss Bennett," she said, wide-eyed, "my teacher says you're why we have the new center. She says you're a hero." Arielle crouched slowly, her baby still in her arms. "No, sweet girl, I'm just someone who got back up." The girl smiled. "I want to be like you." Arielle looked her in the eye and said, "Then be louder, be braver, and never let anyone tell you your story doesn't matter." The girl ran back to her parents. Arielle stood, a weight lifting that she hadn't realized was still there. They walked past the newly installed sign, the Arielle Bennett Justice Center etched in stone. The courthouse had been renamed by a unanimous city council vote. Public pressure had carried it all the way to the governor's office, who endorsed the change himself. Inside, reforms were already underway. Civilian review boards were active. Mandatory body cameras were standard. A task force on racial equity was staffed and funded. But for Arielle, the real change wasn't just in legislation or signage. It was in the silence that no longer felt oppressive. It was in the eyes of the officers who now nodded, not glared. It was in the way her town said her name, with respect. She turned one last time, looking at the steps where she once bled and begged, and prayed for her child. They were clean now, bright, freshly scrubbed by time and truth and collective courage. A butterfly lifted off from a railing nearby. A breeze stirred the corner of a protest banner still pinned to the wall. And Arielle, her husband, and her son walked toward the future. Not quietly, but freely,